President Joe Biden referred to the Chinese leader Xi Jinping as a dictator a while back, and of course, there was pushback from Beijing, but I think Biden was absolutely correct. And Xi Jinping is the most powerful leader in China since Mao Zedong. Deng Xiaoping was important insofar as he opened the country up. He was also a significant figure, but and then you could argue that Hu Jintao kind of laid the groundwork for China's economic rise. But Xi Jinping has been utterly dominant. I'm going to read out a piece in the Times by Richard Spencer regarding Xi Jinping's crackdown on artistic freedom. And it's in many ways he parallels Mao. There hasn't been tens of millions of deaths under his watch, but he has very much galvanized the cult of Mao, and the control on China has only increased under his watch. You know, there was a period, and Spencer mentions this in his report. There was a period of sort of relative liberalization in China, relatively speaking, from roughly speaking the mid 1970s, and then up to the Tiananmen Square massacre, and then again somewhat at points during the 2000s. But under Xi Jinping, it has absolutely got worse. And I can personally testify to this because I visited China twice, 2013 and 2018, in a working capacity. And definitely the second time around, although I personally had a good experience, I could tell that the sense of censorship and state control had increased. I was certainly a lot more cautious in the things I said and done. Anyway, this is the report. It's a little bit lengthy, but I think it's important to read it out. Um, she cracks down on artists who mock Mao. This is from October the 14th. Um, One surprise was that the Gao brothers got away with it for so long. Their smooth, strange sculptures of Chairman Mao in poses by turns violent and humiliating were a carefully thought-out challenge to the Chinese Communist Party, which still officially venerates him. Yet for years they continued to work from the studio near Beijing, travelling more or less freely to international exhibitions. We tried not to think about the question of whether we were allowed to do this work or not, Gao Cheng, 62, the younger of the two, said in New York, where he now lives. We simply assumed we were free and believed we should be free to do any artwork, and at the same time we prayed for God to keep us safe. I assume they're Christians. The second surprise was that the party should decide to move years later when the brothers were no longer living in China. Gao Zhen, the elder brother, was finally arrested last month at the age of 68 when he returned home to visit relatives with his wife and son. He remains in custody. A bit like Russia, this is my intermission. It's a difficult decision dissidents often have to make whether to return home or not, knowing the risk that they face. His detention was a warning, Gao Chang said, and a sign of how China, never liberal, but once having become more tolerant, was now changing again. The space for freedom in China has shrunk a lot, he said. The Gao brothers are sort of Chinese Gilbert and George. Uh, if you're familiar with Gilbert and George, they're um, sort of conservative brothers in London who conservative ostensibly in their political views, but certainly not in their art. Anyway, a sort of Chinese Gilbert and George who worked together and looked uncannily alike despite their age difference emerged from China's turbulent, semi-secret explosion in art and writing in the 1980s. Mao had died and Deng Xiaoping was slowly opening up the country and the economy, although there were still campaigns against spiritual pollution. A new generation of artists had grown up in the shadows of the Cultural Revolution, an experience they were determined to express artistically. The Gao brothers' father had been killed as a suspected right-winger in 1969, although the precise circumstances in which he was beaten to death were never clear. Just a quick point on this, and just in intermission again. Song Bingbing was one of the Red Guard leaders who notoriously beat her head teacher to death in 1966 in what's thought to be the first high profile death in the Cultural Revolution. I mean, it should never be forgotten Mao directly influenced thousands and thousands of murders in that period. For many people like the Gals, the Tiananmen Square protests and subsequent massacre were also a focal point, one that proved politically to be an interruption rather than a full stop in their careers. The Gals were already becoming well known inside China, but as the 1990s progressed, they joined the forefront of a new radical wave influenced by the young British artist movement led by Damien Hirst and Tracy Emin, creating disturbing pieces, many a twist on Mao era propaganda. One sculpture showed a firing squad, each rifleman bearing the placid face of Mao as he appears in official portraiture executing a figure of Christ. Another showed Mao leading in apologetic self-humiliation, expressing the remorse that he never showed in his life. Attempts to show the works in public often ended in failure, but the Gals themselves survived. Although we encountered many big or small troubles due to the creation and exhibition of sensitive works, generally speaking, really thank God we were okay, Gao Chang said. Artistic freedom reached a limited peak in the years between Beijing being awarded the 2008 Olympics, I believe that was around 2002, the award, and the 2008 Olympics and the Games themselves, as the city became one of the most fashionable in the world. The artistic art community, as an expression of this, was too valuable to persecute, and its unofficial headquarters, a redundant giant missile factory in northeast Beijing called Factory 798, became a tourist mecca. Modern Chinese art sold at auction houses around the world, first for tens of thousands of dollars and then hundreds of thousands and finally millions. But there were always limits, even during this era, which superficially might have seemed quite permissive. There was never a time when artists and writers weren't being arrested, said Ma Jian, one of China's best known writers of the period, now living in London. I have a book by Ma Jian, Beijing Coma. Anyway, Ma's books exploring the country's modern history, sometimes literally, such as Red Dust, a novelist's record of a 3-year journey around Deng's China, brought him a worldwide audience. After 1989, Ma lived in Hong Kong for a decade, but he was still able to return to Beijing. After the Olympics, however, the repression became more open. Pretexts were found to arrest the most outspoken artists, such as Ai Weiwei, who had used his prominence to speak up for families whose children had been killed owing to shoddy and corrupt building practices in the Sichuan earthquake of 2008. The ascent to power in 2012 of Xi Jinping, whose father, while persecuted in the Cultural Revolution by Mao, had also been a close lieutenant at one stage, posed the space for historical introspection further. One by one, artists and writers moved abroad. Ma, who was already living in London, found it harder to return home in 2013 when his mother was dying. He was stopped from entry from Hong Kong to visit her. He was eventually allowed in under close monitoring for her funeral, his last visit home. She has taken it all to a new level, he said. The Gao brothers, meanwhile, were moving freely, if circumspectly, between New York and Beijing, but in 2021, Xi introduced a new law that seemed to precisely target the Gaos and artists like them. It became an offence to dishonour China's martyrs and heroes. Mao clearly was to be regarded among them, despite the experience of the Gao's father and countless millions who died under his rule. Mao indeed made countless people heroes and martyrs, but he himself is not a hero or martyr, Gao Chang said. I don't remember when he was ever awarded the honorary title of hero or martyr. More shockingly, it became clear, not least from Gao Zhen's own case, that the law was to be applied retroactively. He was in his studio's living quarters with his wife and son when the police arrived, surrounding it before and taking both him and its artistic contents away. He remains in detention, and although his lawyer and his wife have been allowed to visit him, there is no sign that he will be released soon. His wife was also stopped from leaving the country. In cases like that of Liu Xiaobo, the dissident Nobel Peace Prize winner, who died of cancer in 2017, and other figures with an international reputation, spouses are often held under virtual house arrest to prevent them publicising cases to the international media. Ma Jian has organised an open letter of protest demanding Gao Zhen's release. It has the signature of prominent writers and artists around half still in China, a brave step. We have reached a point where if we continue to remain silent, who knows what will be next, Ma said. If another artist is arrested and disappeared, when is your when it is your turn, who will speak out for you? The Gao brothers are very important artists who think very deeply about the Chinese situation and are brave enough to tackle the most sensitive taboos. As for Gao Chang, he now realizes that he made his choice the minute he left China for the last time 7 years ago. Unless and until something changes, which looks a remote prospect, he will not revisit the land of his birth and his father's death. So that's an article by Richard Spencer. Just to summarize this, I think it's very cowardly of Xi Jinping, not surprising, but cowardly, because in a sense, all dictators are at heart cowards. Xi Jinping, no doubt, sees himself as another Mao, but he wants to avoid Mao's mistakes, his economic mistakes. So you sort of have in Xi Jinping kind of a combination of Mao and Deng Xiaoping with the focus on economic growth, but Mao Zedong with the dictatorial tendencies, although pretty much every Chinese leader has been a dictator by definition. Um, Xi Jinping is a brutal dictator. There's no question about it. What's been going on in Xinjiang in recent years is abhorrent. It also puts Islamic countries to shame when they are silent on that issue. Um, but this cultivation of the Mao cult, China will never be a democracy so long as you cannot criticize Mao freely. And there's other examples in literature as well. For example, the book Mao the Unknown Story by Yuan Chang and John Halliday, still not available in China. I've got two copies of it. It's an exhaustive biography of Mao Zedong with extensive interviews, extensive resources, but it's blocked in China. Um, Even in Russia, you could still find literature critical of Stalin. China, there's one difference with China insofar as the regime that's running China is the same regime that Mao was part of. So China's a long way off from being a true democracy, and it's only got worse under Xi Jinping, which is thoroughly depressing. But even if we look at his record around the world, China's cover up of COVID, you know, millions dead around the world, that should not be easily forgotten. I may make another video on that. But for this one, it's Xi Jinping's cowardly attack on artistic freedom, his regime's cowardly attack on artistic freedom. China is a country of 1.4 billion people, and they're being denied um, different perspectives on things. And so long as that is the case, it cannot be a true democracy. This is Xi Jinping's record, and it's an absolute disgrace.